Good energy, good energy.
And we're live.
So welcome to the sixth week of CL MOOC, and coming to you from the Hudson Valley Writing Project. We're very happy to be co-facilitating this week, and looks like we're off to a great start with the 5-image story. And I'm Bonnie Kaplan, and I'm going to sort of kick us off and then hang back because the team with me has great things to say, and we know there'll be people in the chat room that are also going to hopefully participate with us as well. So the Hudson Valley Writing Project, as a Phoenix site, is a site that came from an older version in the early 2000s, was very lucky that as we were becoming a site, the digital world was starting to kick off in the National Writing Project. And probably from the earliest days, we always had an interest in the image, in digital storytelling, and it made for great opportunities for teachers that joined us from that point on who were really interested in technology, that they were able to use the resources of our local site and the National Writing Project events to be able to sort of pursue their interests in technology. So the 5-image story felt like a very comfortable fit when Jack Zangerly and I, who I'm sort of introducing him now, started playing with the idea of how to get kids engaged with digital stories, but sort of stepping back and making it a little bit easier to start with. So that was really our beginning in like 2010, where we found Wesley Fryer on Flickr and started looking at it from that point. So I've been co-director of our writing project since the early 2000s, and it's been a pleasure. I was a high school English teacher for a long time, and then stepped up and have been working with the writing project since we began. So I'm going to step back, and I'm going to introduce Jack Zangerly to say a few words.
Thank you, Bonnie. My name is Jack Zangerly from the Hudson Valley Writing Project as well, and I teach 8th grade English at Dover Middle School in Dover Plains, New York, which is a kind of semi-rural school district about 100 miles north of New York City. And maybe 4-ish, 5-ish years ago now, maybe a little less than that, Bonnie and I had an opportunity to start doing some work with a grant we had, where Bonnie was able to be in our school and working with the kids and working with the teachers, and we were able to sort of develop this idea of what it means to tell a story with images and digital literacies and visual literacies and composing, and started to do this work with a smaller group of kids that we eventually brought out to a larger group of kids as well. And that starting point kind of, I think that was about the time Bonnie was coming to this idea of a 5-image story, and she brought that to a teacher group that was working through professional development, and also to a group of students as well. And so teachers and students were working with this idea of 5-image stories together, and then looking at where it evolves to and where it goes from there. And I think that's part of our conversation this week is the 5-image story as a starting place, and then what are the evolutions of that and where does that go? And I think that's definitely part of what we'll talk about tonight and what we're really hoping to explore for the rest of the week with the larger community. So that's something I know that we're excited about, seeing how this could situate itself in lots of different places. I know just today we saw some sort of new and interesting angles on this idea that we'll talk about in a bit that I thought were fun. And I know my own kids here at home were playing with already today, so it's been fun. Andrea? Can you hear me?
Hello, yeah, I'm here. My name is Andrea Tejedor. I'm the Director of Innovation and Instructional Technology in the Highland Falls Fort Montgomery Central School District. We're about an hour north of Manhattan. I have been working with Bonnie for the past, I guess, 3.5 years for professional development for the faculty and looking at how images can be used in different content areas. And we started out with the 5-image story as a way to really engage our science and social studies teacher in using images to spur students' interest in writing and sort of capture their attention through the images and engage them in the content. A lot of times children obviously are reluctant to write, and this was one way that we kind of drew them into the writing process as it relates to the content area. So we've been working with different groups of teachers over the past three and a half years or so, and it's been a very interesting process, and teachers have really grabbed onto a lot of these ideas. If you're from New York and you're watching, you know about the Common Core and the ELA modules, and we've really found nice ways to pull this type of writing and the use of imagery into the modules and the writing that's required as a part of the module. So it's really been a nice way to see that happen. Mark, you want to take over?
Hey, Mark.
Hey, how's it going? Sorry, I'm a little late.
It's okay.
I'm Mark Schroeder, and I'm a 6th through 8th grade ESL teacher at Meadow Hill Schools in the Newburgh, New York School District. And I've been working with Bonnie for 5+ years now as part of the tech team, looking at how to use technology in the classrooms, and Jack and Andrea have joined us since then. As far as the 5-image story, really this is my first experience with it, so I kind of came in as the person to look at our make cycle this week and make sure that it made sense to someone who hasn't really worked with it for a long time. And I know just in the last couple of days I've noticed a lot of people getting involved, a lot of really innovative new uses of tools and ways of telling stories. And I know just for me, you know, the experience of making these 5-image stories, I've been seeing how this can help students and how this relates to the writing process just in general. So it's been very exciting for me.
No. Bonnie, frozen?
Bonnie, you there?
Yeah.
Right.
What happened?
You're like blinking in and out. All right.
Yeah.
I think we're good.
Is Mark there still?
Yep, I'm
Yeah,
still here.
we're good.
Okay.
I think Mark's done introducing himself, right?
Okay. So one of the things that I've found really interesting in starting to do this, and I know that what was cool was starting to collaborate on Sunday morning with on Google Docs, and happily seeing Mark's little cursor and his name right there as we started sort of making sense of what we started with. And it was interesting, too, that once we put up the app that we were recommending, which was Tapestry, and I had recommended that app in another school that I was working with a friend of mine, and her kids absolutely loved it and creating the 5-image story. Then I sort of felt, well, I have to do one myself. And it's really, I mean, it's a lot of fun, and it's very easy to use it. And Mark, I know you were working on Tapestry too. You want to talk a little bit about what you did with it?
Yeah, I just experimented with it today. It was really the first time I used it for that story, and it was interesting. It was a fun way. It was really easy because, you know, it was just drag and drop into into the. I used the online web version. I didn't use the actual app on the iPad, but I do want to go back and play with that app to see how easy that is.
Right, and it's on the iPhone as well.
Right. All my pictures were already on my computer, so I used the desktop version of it. But it was really easy, dragging and dropping things in.
I know I'm going to be visiting our SI. What, Jack?
I was going to say, do you think that there's a way that maybe you could turn the screen sharing on and hit the Tapestry website real quick so people could see it?
I just tweeted it out, Jack.
Okay.
Andrea might have just put it in the...
And I posted it on the MOOC chat as well.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's the hashtag CL MOOC on Twitter if you wanted to find that.
Yeah, that's the one. Yep.
And I think, too, we're going to be using it.
I'm going
to be visiting our Summer Institute, and that's going to be their exercise in writing into the morning is they're actually going to go out with their phones and grab 5 pictures and either leave them as images or add text and title to it. And it's interesting that there's been that sort of push and pull, it seems, as people were starting to use this, starting to delve into the 5-image story, where some people were keeping with Wesley Fryer's definition of 5-image standalone, no text, as opposed to people like me that, sort of embrace the text and the title. And I know in my work with Andrea, and also I think in work with Jack, the text piece of it became very, very important, and I think the way teachers started to use it in their classroom, the image and text were adapted to work together.
And
can you just talk about what a 5-image story is in your mind?
Me?
Yeah, do you mind?
Okay. Well, I think you have 5 images as opposed to 6, 7, or 8, but we're sort of leaving 5 as a staple to tell a story, and it could be a variety of different kinds of stories, but a story that has sort of a set, some kind of structure of beginning, middle, or end, or maybe breaking down that structure and creating the story any way you want it to be, and then having those options of within the story, is the image enough? Do you want to add text to it? Do you want a title for it? And again, we've done it many, many different ways with kids, with teachers, to give them that kind of challenge on just getting comfortable with using the image. And it feels, I know even with Kevin at the iAnthology, a lot of times people don't want to be using images. So we felt that this might be a really nice way, and there have been other MOOCs, that have taken on images. We sort of felt like this could be a really simple way to engage even more people, more of the NWP community and outside the community in playing with images. Maybe ways they haven't.
And Bonnie, I think that there's a couple questions on the chat and that go along with this. And one of them is why 5 images and not more or less? And I think one of the things that we have found is that it's not overwhelming when we're using 5 images. It really allows the writer to kind of embrace the images and dig deeper into the story as a narrative or in relation to the content. And they don't get overwhelmed with having to respond to so many photos, but they use the photos as inspiration for narrative or for the content and dig deeper with the content into those so that the writing really becomes the focus as opposed to the images, and the images really serve as the inspiration.
And I think there's a challenge too to a number. I mean, it's easy to say, well, I'll do it in 10, and I can have all these shots that do all these different things. When if you're sort of working with a limit, and it's kind of an arbitrary number, 5, but then you're forced to have the composition of those images maybe meet multiple criteria. I know in some of the work that we've done with some kids when they were trying to get a message across, and maybe that's something we can come back and talk about later, the idea of conveying messages. If they're trying to do this with 5 pictures, and this is a group of kids that Bonnie and I worked with, there's a real challenge to how do we create an arc of a story, and understanding that a story has an arc, and the beginning, middle, and end are important, and where those developments, how it develops across the way of the story, the composition of an image, and if they're taking the pictures themselves, and and you're staging the picture yourself, and you're getting it all set up, there's a lot of nuance in there that really requires a lot of sophisticated thinking and planning and preparation and really interesting work that, when you're thinking about kids making that connection back to their other work that they might be doing in some kind of content area, you're adding all these other layers in that are giving it nuance that maybe it didn't have before. So
yeah, and I think when you're confining them to just 5 images, you're really making them think much harder and make tougher choices about, analyzing the pictures and really looking at, does this help my writing? Is it necessary? What is missing? So it really helps them to, work on their editing and the really critical thinking skills about why am I using what I have, and how am I going to use that? How do I weave it together? With 5 images, you have to think about the transitions. Is it transitioning from one into the next so that it tells the clear story that you want to tell?
And I think, too, not that they're exactly the same, but when you're doing digital stories, digital storytelling, and you're talking about the conciseness of, 250 words, 10 images or less, it forces the creators to really be precise and concise with how they use their words and their images. And it sort of feels to me, as you were talking, and I remember we had worked out a structure where the kids, if they followed it, what the function of each of those each of the images 1 through 5 would do for your story. Like how the first one would be an introduction, the second one could be character, the third one could be leading to a climax. It just felt like a concise story with 5 images.
Yeah, I think that's there's a New York Times piece about that we had pulled some of that from. We can put a link to that somewhere in a bit. We can pull it back out. We can add that. That was very useful.
And there's nothing to say you couldn't expand it and say use 8 images or,
And I think that's the real power of it, because that's where ultimately it's going. The 5 is a powerful experience, and when as a teacher trying it now, or when kids are trying to do it in class with some sort of content work, that confine is important, and it's challenging, and it really forces them to think carefully about these images. And I think what it drives home is this message that each picture is important, and if you're going to be composing these multi media texts, and we're mixing words and images and video, music, and all these things, it's not just I could take a million pictures and throw them out there and one of them will stick and something will work. It's no, make thoughtful, careful decisions throughout the process, and 5 forces that decision making. Ultimately, though, what it does is it leads as this sort of jumping off point. I know, Bonnie, and a lot of the work that we've done, it's sort of that first foothold in a larger project where start with a 5-image story around some sort of topic that you're interested in, and then eventually, as they sort of continue that work and maybe some research around it, it becomes these larger, full-on videos with music and narration and all these things. But it's sort of that first step in the visual composition mode. And it's really accessible, and it's easy to sort of as a first step, and difficult at the same time. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing yesterday and today, is people are sort of picking it up and saying, yes, this is something I can do, it's accessible, but it's also something that requires not enough to just leave it at that. You want to push on it, especially with kids in school and various academic situations. We're pushing on it, but it's a really, I think, wonderful door to open. It puts them in that road.
I remember, Jack, when we were sharing in the early days, the 5 image stories, and we had sort of following Wesley Fryer's approach of having another person sort of tell the story of the images, not the person who created it, but somebody sort of observing. And it was interesting to see how some of the stories were not clear in the way that the observer was telling the story, which sort of in that sort of having kids help each other, giving feedback to the quality of their work, like what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. And it was, I think, those early days of creating community where working together with those images really helped.
And that's sort of like bringing lens back and thinking about something critically is for some kids, that's maybe the first time they're doing that, when they're looking at something and saying, does this really make sense? And does it make sense to other people? And if it doesn't make sense to other people, am I effectively communicating to an audience, even though it makes perfect sense to me? And sometimes you want to push on that, and sometimes you don't, but that's sort of an interesting thinking step for kids to be involved in, too.
And Karen, who's in the chat, asked if we have the students, starting with existing images or having students take their own photos. And I know that we've worked with this both ways, where we've had kids go out, especially when they're telling their own narratives. They'll go out and take their own photographs and use those as a start for their narratives. But we've also seen teachers give all of the students the same 5 photos and then see how the story evolves from those photos and how it's different. Especially with teachers that I've worked with in social studies and science specifically, who are using 5 photos related to the content area, and then have the students sequence those based on the narrative they want to tell related to the content they're studying. So I've seen it work both ways. I know, Jack, you've had the kids really come up with their own photos, right?
Yeah, that's sort of where we go with that. But I think, Bonnie, you probably remember when we first brought that to the tech group that we had. It was this group of 12 kids that were sort of all chosen for their technology interests and skills and things like that. And Bonnie actually brought in this collection of 5 photos, and all the kids were given the 5 photos, and they had to actually write on the back what they thought was happening in each, and then sort of work on the sequencing around that. So they were sort of flipping it around as a starting place, just like you were saying, Andrea, to start with the pictures that were created for them, get an understanding of how those pictures were composed and what they did, and then once they had that as a step, then start to say, okay, now what do I need to do around what I want to say, and how am I going to create the images to support that? So it's it's a powerful process in that it allows for these really small scaffolded pieces. Like, there's just so much inherent scaffolding in it. It's not an end destination, and maybe it could be in certain situations and depending on what's happening. But if you're looking at it in the grand scope of a sort of literacy development, I guess for lack of a better term, that it's these small steps. Organize these pictures that you're given. Why are these pictures composed this way? What are these pictures saying? And now what do you need to do based on what you want to say to do the same sort of work to tell a story that uses images? And then eventually,
what I find really interesting,
images. Watch videos. What's that?
Well, what I thought was really interesting is seeing kids work with it, and then teachers working with it very differently. When we were in our teacher group with Andrea, correct, and the teachers used it, you could say a little bit more formulaically or more in a content-rich way, and we've actually included that on the make list, some of the work that teachers did with it. But what was really interesting, and we didn't know about this, but when the teachers started sharing the work of students outside their classroom doors, and other teachers walked by and saw it, that whole thing blew up. It went viral through Andrea's intermediate school, where teachers took it in so many different directions. And I think one of the things that's been really effective for us in the way we've done professional development there is that teachers do have the freedom to take the strategies we're sharing and make it their own. So
Can you talk about what
people
happened a
went,
little bit more, Bonnie?
huh?
Can you explain what happened at Andrew's school, or Andrew?
Andrew, do you want to
That
talk
you
a
said
little
it
bit
went
about it?
viral. Like, what happened?
What happened was we were working with groups of teachers, and I think this was in our second year working together. We really looked at teachers in grades 5 through 9, and we brought them together. And one of the strategies that we looked at was the 5-image story. And so the group that we were working with of social studies, and no, that wasn't the social studies and science teacher, was it? That was the year before. So this is 5-9. So the teachers that we were working with from those grades started doing 5-image stories, and they started hanging them outside their classrooms. And the next thing we know, that there's, people are like, hey, what's that? What are you working on? What are the kids doing? And we saw it being adopted by their peers. So it was really that peer-to-peer training that was taking place then, where we were sitting over lunch, or can I come to your classroom? Can I borrow those images? Can I see how you use this strategy? And how can I use it in my classroom? So we really started to see that movement with this as a writing strategy. That was very appealing, because I think that anybody can do it on any grade level. There's a really low barrier for entry, because the kids find the photos so accessible and can write to them and make their own meaning out of it, based on where they are in the writing stages and where they are in their content or their own narratives or whatever it is that they're working on at that time.
And many of the teachers used the strategy in a very collaborative way. So it was groups of kids looking at images and writing pieces of an essay or whatever or composition together. So it was very, very powerful.
Yeah, there's definitely a collaboration there. I think one of the things that always happens every time we've done it is kids kind of immediately realize they can't do it alone either. This is something that if they're going to, in most cases, assemble and compose these images, they're going to need their friends and other, their classmates that either help them put things together, or to play various roles, or just to move things in a certain way. It's something that very quickly it becomes sort of, they need to be connected to other people in order for it to be possible, and they need to have that collaborative sort of working environment, and they get much more powerful products that way. And they get excited about it.
And I think really, to go back to the point of, where should you start with existing images or making images, I think that is just on a teacher-by-teacher basis. Just looking at what resources do you have. If you have the resources to take pictures, you may want to start there. You might want to do a place-based type story. But if you don't, then you can always start with pre-existing. So there's really no, I think, hard or fast rule. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
And I know that Kevin has put some really interesting things up on Twitter, sort of taking us back to some of the large Flickr groups that have done this, where you could pull maybe one image out and add your own forward to it. So there's such a great variety of how you can use 5-image stories, because it's really been around for a long time, that it still feels fresh when you bring it into a school, because a lot of people still haven't done it yet. But it's been around long enough that there's a lot of great resources. Like, I know that when we were looking around for resources, we weren't at a loss. I mean, if anything, there was too much to put on.
Yeah, I think that kind of circles back a little bit to something Andrea was saying earlier when you mentioned the New York State modules. New York State has sort of put out a series of Common Core aligned modules for ELA that school districts can sort of adopt intact, or adopt and change and adapt, or just use as sort of a suggested guideline. And Andrea was saying something about how she had done some work at their school with 5 image stories related to the Common Core modules from New York State, Andrea?
Um, yeah, well, basically, I mean, what's nice about the 5 image story is that it doesn't require, I know somebody noted on the chat that it really doesn't require scaffolding. It's almost like play. And one of the things that we found is that for many students, it serves as an entry point to content. So for example, in the module about the rainforest, the teachers would give the children photographs of the rainforest and use that as sort of that first entry point in almost like, what do we know about the rainforest? And give them the images and ask them to write to those images. And then go from there and use that as the starting point and then scaffold from there up so that they build the understanding from their interaction with those 5 images. And so a lot of the teachers are looking at it from that standpoint too, where it kind of allows the students to create outlines for future writing, or it allows them to kind of get messy with the content before they study it deeper. So it's really been a nice way to bring the image into those New York State modules.
I think that's such a nice way to think about it, like messy playing with content in those sort of early stages as they're kind of wrapping their heads around, content, whether it's in science or social studies or ELA or whatever, sort of giving kids those easy avenues in. And it's something that it's creating a thinking model as well and outlining all of that too. And I think there's a real power to that. And it really is sort of setting them on that, writing and reading for information. I mean, when we really back it out and try to marry this to content area and content standards, I think there can be some really clear, purposeful connections. When you're doing that sort of work that Andrea was just describing, you're quickly and in an accessible way moving kids to writing for information, and that's something that is the outcome. That's what we're hoping for anyway, and you're able to do this in a way that is giving them that sort of messy play environment or feeling as well, and that's only going to help to get them more dug in.
And there's so much in the Common Core about using moving into digital literacy and using images that I know that what was very challenging for us in working with a variety of different teachers was that science teachers in the intermediate school, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, they had no problem finding ways to use 5 image stories in science. But as you got in the higher grades of science, teachers felt so much more content held that they had to finish a lot of content. They couldn't stop in doing projects, that projects were more frivolous, and how could you justify it? And by sort of breaking down some of that with our own enthusiasm and our own justification, because we had the voices of the junior high science teachers with us to sort of barrel that Andrea's star teacher for the Regents, the teacher who got the highest scores on the Regents, was the teacher that took on the challenge of working through project-based images, writing, where she hadn't done any of it before, but really gave it up to the kids to do, were more engaged in these projects rather than just barreling through content. It was really amazing to watch her struggle, which was authentic, but ultimately there were rewards for taking on that challenge. Am I right?
Yeah, she was skeptical in the beginning. She really was. She says, I don't know how this is going to work. I'm not comfortable with it. I have so much content to get through. And yet, in the end, I mean, her students did really, really well on their New York State finals at the end of the year. So,
and it was earth science, so it wasn't an easy one.
No, it was earth science, and she really struggled with ways to even integrate it. So somebody asked about any ideas for content area classes, and we're talking about that now. But also, Bonnie's posted some videos on the MOOC where the teachers are actually talking about how they did this with their students in their classes. So that's a good place to go and see what the teachers have to say.
I'm wondering if there's anybody in the chat room that might want to join us in this conversation. I know that there was the issue for a while about using the 5 images as a standalone medium as opposed to using text with the images.
That's something that I think kids start. The first inclination is, okay, I'm going to explain what this picture is all about, and I can tell you why it makes sense because I can put these words underneath it and say this is why this picture is next and this is why this picture is next. And that probably speaks back to some of what we were talking about earlier, where if you're really taking seriously the idea of a visual literacy and composition and telling a story using these other skills, it should have sort of that standalone ability. And yes, the words are something maybe we add in later on, but at first, as they're sort of experimenting with it and playing with it, really pushing in that, and Bonnie, I know this is something we did when we were working with the kids, really sort of pushing on that idea of, can somebody else tell what your story is based on just the images? And if not, then their images maybe aren't doing their job, and having that critical eye to it is important. But we've sort of used it as a stepping stone in these larger projects where one of the things we do over the course of about half of a year is ask kids to sort of develop a position around an issue that they care about, around these larger social issues. And it's like a larger research project for the 8th graders. And early in the project, they'll develop a 5-image story around this. And that's their first sort of step in going past, I'm just doing research and reading about it and taking notes and whatever that note mode might be that we're using. And now I'm going to represent it with pictures, and that's that first step. And then the next step is we start to put those together and talk about, well, how would you narrate these? And then now we're folding in sort of this writing piece. And then eventually they become these 2.5-minute long public service announcements that include interviews that they do with people and music to complement it, and there's a narration piece that they put in, and it's all this sort of, I use it as part of a step along this larger continuum to get them to these larger, much more complex pieces at the end. And it's kind of interesting because some of them will come back to their 5-image stories later on. So this year, they probably did their 5-image stories in March or April around whatever issue they were doing. I remember one young lady who was really interested in the idea of equality in women's sports in schools, and she wanted to be on the football team, and she's sort of fighting this battle to be on the football team even though she's a girl, and all these things that go along with it. And she created her 5-image story, and she took all the pictures and was really interested in it because it was something she cared. She was ridiculously passionate about it. It was amazing to watch her. And sort of when she was at the end, towards the end, creating her larger piece, she went back to a lot of those pictures, and one of the ones that she actually closes her piece out was from her 5-image story at the beginning when she was sort of just using those pictures to tell the story, and that was sort of the last image that her longer 2.5-minute, much more complex, video ends with. So they have that sort of kind of coming back and forth.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was good. It was interesting.
And I think, Bonnie, we did something similar or some of our teachers did something similar where they actually used the 5-image story as the first rung of the scaffold that they created for students to get to a digital essay. Actually writing digital essays by the end of the unit that they were studying. But they started that investigation with the 5-image story. So that was kind of like the first point of entry for them with the content, culminating in the digital essay.
Yeah. Monica has just joined. I just see Monica joined us.
similar,
Yeah.
where they actually use the 5-image story as the first rung of the scaffold that they created to get
just
to
have-
a goal.
Hi, Monica.
Hello, Monica.
Oh.
There.
You wanna jump in and say something about the 5-image story? Can she hear?
Can you hear us?
Hear us. Monica, can you hear us? Not sure if she can hear us yet.
She's working on it.
Oh,
Technologically impaired. Yeah.
yeah.
Now
So-
I can, yes.
All right, good.
Oh, there you go.
What would you like to add, Monica?
Nothing. I'm just happy to participate. I just got off of a math institute, and I'm in a writing institute. But actually, what I'm writing about is math. So yeah, I think it's kind of interesting to look at the question of content area, because this would be very rich for social studies, science, and even math.
Yeah, I could almost see doing it with math, like writing story or word problems, but visually with pictures. How could you have students represent a word problem with images, and then maybe tell how do those steps show, or maybe even have a student create like a 5-image story that is a math word problem, and having other students try to figure out what is the math problem that's being represented here. So I think there's something to do with it.
I like that better, just to get to their conceptual understanding.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that, especially when you're going to do this with kids in a classroom, so it's one thing in the summer to take your phone out with you and take pictures outside and all the different things that people are doing with it this week, but it's going to be a bit of a different thing when we're in a room with 25 to 30 13-year-olds and we're saying, now we're going to take pictures. And that, how that goes and what that might mean could be interesting, to say the least, and I know it is. So does anybody have any recommendations for tools, like real nuts and bolts specifics? I know, Bonnie, you were really interested in Tapestry, something you mentioned earlier.
Tapestry is great, and I think
I know there's been a lot on the Twitter chat that we've seen people applying the concept to different tools. So,
I mean, there's also on Apple, there's also Comic Life, which I had actually forgot about, but that's also a really Comic Life. I mean, it's a software that used to be free on all MacBooks, but since then it's not. But it's a tool that allows you to create stories and add sort of the look of a comic book on it to the image, or not. There's a lot of tools that you can use to play with it and add text, but it can look like a comic book. But there are so many other tools. I know Andrea put a lot of references to different resources of free online tools that are pretty easy to use. Correct?
Yeah, I'm going to retweet it again right now.
Okay, good.
I like, they're going to be putting a link in the chat, and I'll tweet it out on the hashtag Diptych for the iPhone or iPad, or just one of those, and there's a million like them, these little collage apps, so you can sort of have one picture that represents all 5, because I know one of the challenges that I sort of came across without, sometimes you think you thought everything through, and then that one detail comes and just takes the wheels completely off what you were doing for that day. So we were taking pictures, and we were going to, share our 5-image stories, and we had everything out, and suddenly, we said, okay, everybody has 5 pictures, now let's share them, and it was like, we all have 5 pictures, where are we going with this? So that's sort of the easy way to do that. So rather than dealing, and this is very practical, like dealing with 5 individual files, having just one that has all 5 in it is very useful when kids are trying to, upload and download and move stuff around. So that Diptyque app, it just, and again, there's a million like them. It's like a photo collage, so you can set it to 6 things, 6 cells or whatever, and then it's very quick. You pop them all in, and bang, you're done.
Right.
And it's one picture that has all.
And that you could probably add text to that too.
Yeah, you can. You can add. You can do little things. So you can do effects and things like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, one other thing for our schools, our teachers out there whose schools have Google Apps for Education, I mean, you can also just create something like this using presentation in Google Apps, and put the 5 pictures in a presentation, and then add titles, subtitles, comments, or actually develop your story right on the slides. So that's an easy way, because then you got your 5 images saved in your drive, and you can just click and drag them into your presentation. So that's a real easy way to do it.
Yeah, and I noticed there were some people that had done that on the Google Plus site that had shared, where they had done that, and I thought that was a good idea. You just drag it right into a presentation, or if you have PowerPoint or any of those, you could end up using something like that.
And what's nice about that is you can save the PDF, and then if you want to print them out, you can. So it's an easy way to move from that digital piece to a printed piece if that's the direction you want to go in as well.
Right, and really we've been talking like it's just a digital tool because that's how we're sharing it, but there's nothing to say that this has to be digital. It could be cutting pictures out of a magazine and pasting it on paper. It could be...
Well, one of the things that Andrea and I love to do in a workshop, and she's done it on her own, I've done it on my own, and we've added those 5 images into the make cycle as well, if we have people out there interested in doing this as well as a community thing, that we give everybody, we break people up into groups in the workshop with the same 5 images, and they get, as a group, so now they're working collaboratively under a very short time frame to put the pictures together and to tell the story. And we've asked for, captions under the pictures and a title. The stories are obviously always different, always interesting, and it's a great way to create community in a very, very quick way, very fast.
And in that way, you can almost use it as an icebreaker too, for meetings and workshops that kind of get people going and thinking and moving in that writing direction.
Yeah.
And using the images as inspiration. So that works really well.
Going back to the Google Applications tie-in too, we've used the drawing app sort of in the same way. Again, that's more of a collage than it is the single flow for like a Google presentation would be one at a time. The Google Drawing that you do the collage thing right inside your Google Applications. You have to be on an actual computer though; it won't work on iOS or Android.
And some people may not like the idea of a collage. I see in the chat room some people are not happy with the collage, but again, that's totally up to you.
Yeah, it's to the maker. And I saw a few collages today that people had done that I thought really worked. But I think if you're doing a collage, that's another layer that you have to think about, and you have to make sure that the students are thinking about, does my collage flow in a way that tells a story? It just can't be slapped haphazardly. So
yeah,
I think it's up to everybody's taste, that one. I was going to say, I think in the Google Drive now there's an application called Slides. I don't know if that's the same as Presentations was, but I think that's one way that I saw people making them as well today.
Yeah, that's they renamed it.
Yeah, I didn't see presentation there. I was just going back and checking. But.
Oh, I'll check. That's what. Did they change the name of it?
Yeah, they switched it because they're moving it to iOS, so they're trying to unify it all.
So, do we have anything else that we want to say? We've got about a 10-minute.
I was going to make another suggestion. Like one thing that I've been doing is I've been doing my 5-image pictures, but then on my blog I've been talking about how I've made it. Not talking about what the story is, getting away from what is the story that I was telling, but really trying to doing a metacognitive thinking about, well, what did I do while making this? And I think that might be something you could have students do as well to help them think about what thinking did I need to use to make this, and then seeing if you can tie that back to their writing, because I think ultimately our goal is to make them better writers.
Mm-hmm.
And so using this is a tool to get them to think in that way, and we're building those thinking skills and kind of exercising the muscles up there to get them thinking creatively and thinking outside. Because sometimes I think maybe when students write, they're locked into what they think the process is. So I think sometimes they need help unlocking what writing is and how to think about writing, and not just going at it from the one way that they've done it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that unlocking.
Monica, do you want to say something? Because I think you wrote something in the chat room.
Oh, well, this is my first time using iMovie to do this, and so when I upload it to the site, I believe it had to go through approval, and so then I think I uploaded again because I didn't read that fully. But so I put in another link, and it's the same video, but I had chosen these 5 images this morning when we had talked about it. So like I said, I just came off of a math institute, and it was for 3 weeks, and so that's been weighing heavy on my mind, and to try to pick 5 images was tough.
Yeah.
It was
And
tough.
how did you? Why was it tough? What was tough about it?
It's a very intense bubble that we lived in for 3 weeks. You are working, on these big projects, and you're meeting people and making connections, and it was like college light in a way. But it was just so intense, and when it ended, it was kind of abrupt. We knew it was coming, and we're all kind of clinging to it. So when I went into this writing project yesterday, everything I've been writing about has been about math.
So the images so it was hard for you to pick 5 images out of all that you had.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There's a lot that goes on in the 3 weeks, and the fact that we have to live there, and it's out of state, and there's a lot more going on than just the Math Institute. There's the weekend activities as well. So, yeah, to tell that whole story, I was really pressed to condense it to 5 images.
It sounds pretty intense.
Oh, it's in the Make Bank, yay.
Nice.
So, did anybody have any last words? Because we're getting down to the last few minutes.
Well, I'll just add that I really think this is a really powerful way to get students to write, to engage them in content, and to challenge their thinking in ways that we're not able to do with words, but ways that we can sort of inspire them with writing and with the visual image, and bring them perhaps in directions that they haven't explored previously. I've seen it work with personal narratives, but also with content areas, and really bringing kids in to discover things that would have been difficult to bring them there with words.
Yep.
Great. That's great.
I continue to sort of I've done this a couple times now with kids, and it's such a great first step when we sort of enter that, we're going to be doing some different kind of composing now, and this might not be something that you've done before, and it's just always been this really successful first step or two, and it's something that I just keep coming back to, and I know it works, and I enjoy it, and it's something I feel like we get where we want to go because we're laying a good foundation. This is kind of part of that foundation, and it gets kids thinking about it in a nice way. And it's something that, as different teachers have tried to do it in different content areas, it's something that you can make so easily flexible. It's so easily flexible, and to move it into different areas, it just works. And it's something that as we move into the school year, sort of thinking about, the Make Bank and where these things might have some kind of archive in different contexts, there's going to be different versions of this that are really going to work for people. And I think it's exciting that we'll have, I mean, just from what we have from the last day and a half, the collection that we're going to be able to sort of tap into as an archive of here are all these things now that we can show as sort of models and ideas for kids and teachers to sort of saying, hey, here's this idea, and here's these 7 examples I can put my hands on real quick of what I'm talking about to sort of help you sort of visualize literally what you want this to be and where it can go. So I'm excited about this and sort of seeing some of the, where it's been already this week and where we can go with it. And Kim and Hutchin had the idea of the 5 emoji story earlier this morning, which was a lot of fun and ridiculously hard when you stopped to try to do it.
And I would say on the way out, I'd like to thank you guys. It's such a pleasure to be in a conversation with you and to be working with you on this. And Monica, thank you for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome for having me.
We're looking forward to more this week on this MOOC with the NWP and the communities that may join us. And we'll be there. It's also a lot of fun to be back on Twitter on a regular basis, which I'm not used to. So on behalf of everybody at HBWP, NWP, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great week.